And thanks so much for tuning in to Morning Live. Now, the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, also known as the Zondo Commission, has been in existence for a year already. The commission was set up in March, starting with the secretariat to prepare for the work to be done. And the investigation team started working in July, and the first hearings was on the 20th of August last year. And the commission has gone through a number of witnesses and volumes of documents. And today, Commission Chair, Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo is our guest to give us an update on the work of the Commission 1 year on. Good morning and thank you so much. Good to see you again.
Good morning, Sakina. Thank you very much for having me on your show. Thank you very much.
It's amazing how time flies, because I was just saying to you off air, you've literally become an institution now, because when we switch on our TVs, we're so used to seeing you. It's like, if the Commission is not on, like, where's the Commission?
No, I hear some people complain if there is an adjournment and there won't be any hearings. They say, what are we going to do now?
Absolutely. But how has it been for you, given, you know, the public nature of this particular sitting?
Well, let me say that part of it has been very good. We have found that the Commission enjoys a lot of love and support from ordinary South Africans. The kind of things that people say when they see us in the malls or in functions, the support is really very important, very big. And I think that, of course, there will be people who are not supporters of the Commission, and they are there, you know. But I think on the whole, there's a lot of support and love from people, ordinary people. I remember one time I was in a mall in Durban, and there was this man and his wife. After they had passed, I think the man recognized me and told his wife. His wife came back and he said, "Are you Judge Zondo?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "Can I hug you?" And she hugged. I said, "Yes." She said, "Thank you for the work that your commission is doing." That kind of support keeps us going, all of us in the commission. There have been certain challenges, of course, but on the whole, I think we have done, our best.
The support, of course, and I fully concur with you, it is there, but it is not unconditional. People have expectations of this particular process.
Yes. No, definitely. And they have a right to have an expectation. And that is something that we must, in the Commission, we must always bear in mind. And we have got to focus on what we have to do. We have to deliver on our mandate. And every day we wake up every morning wanting to do exactly that. As you say, we started with public hearings in August last year. From August 20 to the end of the year, there were times when we were supposed to sit and we wouldn't sit for a week or 2 weeks because it was there were still certain challenges. But from this year, we started about mid-January this year. Since then, up to now, except for about 2 weeks around Easter time and 2 weeks that when we took a break recently, except for that, we have almost throughout been hearing evidence. Every week in, week out, we've been sitting there hearing evidence. Evidence leaders have been leading evidence. Investigators are out there conducting investigations. So we have really been trying to focus on what we have to do. We really appreciate that support and that love is unconditional, and we would like to make sure that we don't disappoint.
Now, just staying with those expectations, people want to know the truth. They want people held accountable as a result of what may be revealed and what comes out in the end from this particular process. But perhaps it's worth just taking a step back at this point and just reminding the public at large once again what the mandate of this commission actually is.
Well, the mandate of the commission, as spelled out in the terms of reference, is very wide. It's to investigate allegations of state capture, corruption, fraud in the public sector, which includes organs of state, SOEs, government departments, and so on, And it also includes tenders that may have been given by government departments, by provincial departments, by municipalities throughout the country that may have, where there may be allegations of corruption, including officials, politicians, officials who are in various departments, the public. So it's a very wide mandate. But of course, I think what a lot of people focus on is the state capture part, because also it's very important, but corruption throughout.
And given what's transpired thus far, we see you there, very even-keeled, very calm manner. But have you had moments of frustration during this year-long period of listening to evidence?
I think in terms of what happens inside the hearings, there haven't really been moments of frustration. There have been moments when I could see that things could go wrong, but they have been put under control in time. In terms of what happens outside of the hearings, because of course it's not just the hearings, there is a lot of work that gets done behind the scenes. There have been moments when one feels a little frustrated, but on the whole, things are under control.
So this one-year anniversary of the commission that you chair, incidentally comes at a time when there's a judgment handed down pertaining to the findings of another commission of inquiry, the Seriti Commission of Inquiry. And a number of questions naturally come up. And let me start by asking, how much has this commission that you chair, how much has this cost the South African taxpayer to date?
Well, I can't give you the exact figures for the whole time, but obviously an operation such as this costs money, and it costs a lot of money. But I know that from beginning of this financial year up to now, I think we have spent over 100 million rand. But I don't have the figures from beginning of the commission last year. So it costs a lot of money. And if we are to do the job properly, there'll be a lot of money that will be spent. But throughout, it is our duty to make sure that as far as possible, we don't spend one more cent of taxpayers' money unnecessarily. And we keep that in mind.
So coming back to yesterday's High Court judgment and that ruling setting aside the findings of the Seriti Commission, in the region of 150 million rand was spent on that commission. And now you have those findings set aside. So the South African public naturally wonders about value for money in these commissions of inquiry. Did you pay any further attention, do any introspection with regard to that, given how much you've done and how much still needs to be done in your commission?
Well, one, I haven't read the judgment, but I know that the judgment was handed down, and I saw what I saw on the news. I think what is important is that from our side, we have always got to bear in mind that we must do our job properly. We must carry out our mandate properly. We must carry out our mandate without fear, favor, or prejudice. At the end of the day, and this is what I say to the team in the commission, when we have finished with the work of the commission, we must be able to look at what we have done, to look at the report, and be able to say, we've done a good job. We mustn't expect that everybody will agree with the findings that I will make. We mustn't expect that everybody will be in full praise of the report. But in the end, as long as we can look at what we've done and be able to say we've done our work without fear, without favor, without prejudice, and we've given it our all, and then we will be able to sleep peacefully at night. So we want to do our job properly. We don't want to disappoint South Africans, but we accept that there are limitations. There are limitations in terms of resources and time. And we can only go up to a certain point. We have to prioritize certain things. We can't investigate everything in the country. So we accept those limitations.
And that brings me to the next question in terms of how long do you think, given what's been going on, given the length of time it's taken in some instances to deal with a particular matter, one has to question how much longer will this commission sit?
No, that's true. That's a very legitimate question, and I think it's a question that many people ask every day. Unfortunately, one is not able to give a definitive answer because as we speak here, as I sit here, investigations are going on, and I don't know as yet what is being discovered. I will get to know later. It may be that they are discovering something that we never thought would be unearthed. And that might involve a lot of witnesses who must be interviewed and who must be called. Because if we don't call them, we might be said not to have done our job properly. So there is that concern. But obviously, this commission can't go on forever. So one has got to strike a balance. I had hoped at some stage that by August this year, we would have finished the hearing of oral evidence, or at least we tried to push for that. But as the investigations went on and more things were unearthed, it became clear that we couldn't. So as things stand now, our lifespan at the moment goes up to the end of February next year. But it's clear that we are going to have to apply for an extension of time, because even the writing of the report only, if I look at other commissions, a lot of them have taken about 6 months just for the writing of the report after the completion of oral evidence. We won't have that. We still have a lot of implicated persons that need to be given a chance to come and give evidence. Others might decide not to come because, we have issued about more than 700 what we call Rule 33 notices, that is notices to implicated persons, more than 700. But a lot of those people have not applied to cross-examine witnesses who implicate them. But out of those, there are those who we are going to say, well, whether you have applied for leave to cross-examine or not, we want you to come and account. We want you to come and give evidence. So some will have to come. So I'm hoping that we are going to push very hard to try and finish with the hearing of oral evidence in the first half of next year if we are granted an extension. But we depend on the High Court to get an extension.
And perhaps just moving slightly out of the bounds of your scope, because you are chairing the commission. But if one thinks about other arms of state entities who are also, viewing these proceedings, there's an expectation that they ought to be acting, doing their bit with regard to the evidence that has already come before the commission. One thinks back day one, Angelo Agrizzi talking about tax fraud on day one, and one would have expected that other organs of state would have already stepped in to try and move along and do their jobs. Is that a fair expectation?
No, I think it is a fair expectation, and I think a lot of people raise that quite often. Well, from our side as the Commission, we accept that there are other institutions, agencies involved in law enforcement who have a job to do. Now, we think that they are the ones who must make up their mind whether they've got enough evidence to start acting in terms of their own mandates, whether you're talking about arresting people, you're talking about prosecutions. They must make up their mind. Now, generally speaking, the evidence that is led in the commission is made publicly, and even statements of witnesses, once these witnesses have given their evidence, their statements are available on the commission's website. It's available. Where we would expect some sensitivity would be where we have witnesses who may be cooperating with the commission while they are giving evidence. We would expect some sensitivity in terms of timing, in terms of arrests. But other than that, we expect other agencies to do their job, as I say, in regard to certain witnesses, just to exercise sensitivity.
Earlier on, we spoke to good leader Patricia de Lille about that Seriti Commission findings being set aside. And she was of the view that money needs to be recovered from the evidence leader, from the chairperson, Judge Willie Seriti himself. What's your view, once again, on that sort of perception and perspective that this needs to happen, given what has now been taken into the courts and the latest decision in that regard? Because, again, as you are heading up this commission and that sort of judgment is handed down, surely it has induced some form of introspection on your part.
Well, as I said, I haven't read it, but I intend reading it. It was handed down yesterday. So I will be getting it and I'll read it and I'll take note. But I think that in terms of some people saying, money must be recovered from the chairperson of that commission or the evidence leader, I think generally speaking the approach is, and I think it ought to be, I think it is to say, provided somebody has been performing their duties in good faith, doing the best that they can, acting reasonably, there should be no risk of any costs. Obviously, if you have gone beyond certain parameters of acting, and particularly if you may be said to have acted in bad faith, that kind of thing, there may well be room for certain people to begin to say, well, maybe something should be done about it. But where you may have been wrong in the performance of your work, but it's in good faith and you are acting reasonably, usually you shouldn't be involved. You shouldn't have anybody talking about costs about you. But nobody is above the law, and we all accept that.
Judge Seriti says this ruling is neither here nor there for him, but does this impugn his integrity?
Well, as I say, I haven't read it, and I don't want to say much about it without reading it. But one of the things we have got to accept is that those who exercise public power, those who carry out public functions, whether you are talking about a politician, whether you're talking about a judge, whether you're talking about a government official, you have got to accept that there is room for error. And that room for error is always there. And there are many times when we must accept that somebody didn't made an error, but that should be the end of it. It was in good faith. Then we need to appreciate that there may be circumstances where it's not just an error. It goes much more beyond that. And maybe that's where certain penalties or considerations relating to penalty might come in. But we must accept that errors can be made. I can make an error. Another judge can make an error. The Chief Justice can make an error. We can all make errors. But at the same time, we have got to bear in mind as society that we must be careful not to have a situation where next time a judge is asked to chair a commission, he or she says, I don't want to put myself into that situation where I could end up being sued and I must pay costs because I erred. So it's a question of where we draw the line. You can't say it should never happen because you don't want people to abuse power. If they abuse power, then it might have to happen. But somewhere you have got to say, as long as the conduct falls within these parameters, even if we don't agree with it, there should be nothing in terms of costs.
Deputy Chief Justice, it's 8 o'clock. I have 2 more questions for you, if you will indulge us. But let's go to news, and then we'll come back and take those final 2 questions.
Okay.
Right, let's cross over to Leanne for the latest news.